Hey guys, my name is Hey guys. Hey guys, my name is Mark Wang and you're watching Mark Wang Car Garage. So today I'm excited to announce that I'm starting a new section in our YouTube channel. We're gonna start something called head-to-head. So head-to-head is meant to have in-depth review between two different vehicles, and today we're going to start with comparing one of the hottest vehicles that people have been requesting, the legendary Japanese domestic vehicle, which is one of the most iconic car that Japan has ever produced, the legendary R34 GTR. And on the other side here, I have the supercar killer of this decade. When it first produced in 2008, this is smashing Nürburgring records and also some other stuff to dust all these supercars into shame. Here, the R35 Nissan GTR. So today, I'm going to do a head-to-head comparison on some of the similarities and some of the differences in various aspects. Hopefully you find this video helpful for you to either one day think about purchasing one of these vehicles or even just to rent and experience it. So shall we start? Let's go. Well, let's first start off with the R34 GTR. So after a halt of 16 years, the first R32 Skyline GTR came into the market in 1989 and earned the nickname the Godzilla after winning years of Australian touring series. The R34 GTR started production in 1999 and ended in the early 2000s. One thing that I really think is legendary on the Skyline GTR is the fact that the chassis is so refined. Very different from the R35, where Nissan never really updated its chassis over its time. The R34 GTR went through multiple iterations of refinement, starting with the R32 GTR, which is ahead of its game during 1989. It's absolutely a spaceship at that point of time, and continuously going through refinement, and ballsily tried a big, longer wheelbase chassis with the BNR 33. And finally landed with the most epic chassis design possible, which came with this, the BNR 34. And also something that's really revolutionary about the R34 GTR is this all-wheel drive system paired up with this HiCus full-wheel steering. So in fact, if you did not know, the R34's rear wheel actually steers when you steer the front steering wheel. So that is something that was really ahead of its time. I mean, R34 is absolutely a halo car to us car enthusiasts, not only because of the fact that it is a GTR, but also due to the Fast and Furious franchise. I mean, who does not want to be Paul Walker, aka Brian O'Connor, driving one of these guys roaming on the street, right? Let's go ahead and talk about the R35 GTR, shall we? So after Nissan ended productions on the Skyline series, there is a halt between the older model until this generation, which is no longer called the Skyline. So this car's first prototype was announced in 2001, and later the second generation prototype was announced in 2005, and finally started production in Japan in 2007, and production in the United States in 2008. Very similar to its predecessor, the R35 GTR did carry a lot of the characteristics from its previous generations. For example, its bulkiness, its size, its brutal power, its otherworldly spaceship-like characteristic ahead of its time. It certainly uplifted this entire automotive industry game, where supercar manufacturers was previously slacking on its performance and holding back on technologies. But with this thing coming out, murdering everybody, it is absolutely a catalyst in the early 2000s to push the automotive performance game forward. This is one of Nissan's most iconic vehicle ever built, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to be one of these cars that is a poster car of today's generation. Let's start with the engine bay comparison. So the Nissan R35 GTR comes with the standard VR38 DETT. This is the next generation twin camshaft 3.8-liter engine that Nissan has designed that were previously put into naturally aspirated models such as the Nissan 350Z and Nissan 370Z.
I'll say the R35 GTR's engine is one of the most iconic engine of all time because how small of a displacement in relative to how much horsepower it's producing. Its 3.8 liter engine can produce north of 2,000 to the wheel after modification. And I think this is something that really speaks to the scalability of Japanese engineering. One of the weaknesses of the R35 GTR in terms of its powertrain is its dual clutch transmission. Especially for the earlier models called CBA, it is known to break its transmission from just day-to-day driving. A stock R35 with minor upgrade can easily produce somewhere close to 600 to the wheel. Using the stock turbo, the car will get in much quicker, and this is probably best suited for a daily driving purposes without really compromising its reliability. The R34 GTR in comparison has a very different engine setup. Once we open up the engine bay, you can obviously see the most iconic engine layout over here, which is the RB26 DETT. So if you guys were wondering what RB26 stands for, it's race breed 2.6 liter electrically direct injected twin turbo engine. As you can see, this is an inline 6 setup, and for this particular vehicle I do have the HKS VCAM upgrade, and this car has been strokered up to 2.8 liter, so it's no longer called the RB26 but it's called the RB28, which is a variation of the RB26 but with slightly bigger displacement. This car is producing 650 to the wheel horsepower, and that is a boatload more than this particular R35. However, if you're talking about a full bolt-on to full bolt-on comparison, I will say that an R34 GTR is a much slower vehicle, but it is by no means slow at its generation. One thing I also want to talk about is its transmission. So the GATTRAC transmission is actually shared between the MK4 Supra and also the R34 GTR. It's one of the best 6-speed transmissions aside from what Honda builds. The GATTRAC transmission can easily take around 600 to the wheel in terms of horsepower, which is a huge upgrade in comparison to the 5-speed transmission, which is previously made for the R32 and R33 generation. So the GATTRAC is a really good transmission. It's certainly not one of the weak points of the R34. One thing about the inline 6 engine is it's very stable at high RPM. So if you look at this car's speedometer, it does rev up to around 8,500 RPM. One of the stupid things about the R34 speedometer on its RPM gauge is that between 1,000 and 3,000, the RPM gauge is really collapsed. It's pretty much telling you that, hey, this is not the power band that you would like to driving to truly enjoy your vehicle. The R34 do need to rev up to 4,000 RPM before you're starting to get into its power band. However, the cool part about an RB26 engine is the higher the RPM you go, the more horsepower and torque it gets. It's a very addictive feeling of a classic 90s JDM car, where the harder you push the car and the more the car will offer you. The R35 GTR's power band is very different. The car revs just below 7,000 RPM at its red line. There's a lot more torque that comes early from this vehicle. With the standard turbo and with the full bolt-on kit, you do experience a little bit of a turbo fade after 5,000 RPM. However, this car do get a lot more low-end torque between 2,000 and 3,000 RPM. So this is perfect for freeway driving where you're on a higher gear and really want to pass somebody. You most likely do not need to downshift, and the car will just use its torque, does its work, and push the car forward. So that's one thing that's really superior with a much bigger displacement in the newer model. However, the older model is much more addicting when you're driving at its limit. When you're driving on the track, this is certainly the car to do. The R34 GTR and the R35 GTR really shares a lot design characteristics between the older model and the newer model. So for example, these iconic 4-circle taillights, that's something that's shared between the R34 and the R35. You can tell that they absolutely came from the same breed. One thing that's very different between the R35 and R34 is the number of exhausts. The R34 usually have 1 or 2 at the most, when the R34 has 4 exhausts, simply because of the 3+3 setup instead of inline 6. So you have 2 downpipes that's coming out and everything is symmetric. I personally love the quad setup on the car and makes the car look quite aggressive. The other thing that really carried forward and nothing has really changed between the GTRs is that GTR badge. If you look at the GTR badge in the front, nothing has changed in terms of its color, its font, and everything else. Everything stays the same. It is, after all, a Godzilla. Let's step into the interior, shall we? So I'm inside the R34 GTR, and one of the most iconic thing about the R34 GTR is its MDF, the multifunctional display. So this is not something that they have in the earlier generations in the R32 GTR and the R33 GTR. So let's go ahead and give it a half crank. Let's see the animation of how it starts. And in my particular vehicle, I do have the Nismo upgrade, so you can see the GTR with the Nismo logo in the back. However, if it's a standard GTR, you will only see the GTR emblem. So let me go ahead and crank the car halfway. Now you can see the MDF in its full form. So on top there's boost, there's oil pressure, injector, oil temperature, water temperature, exhaust temperature, and also internal temperature. I believe the exhaust temperature and internal temperature are not displayed in a non-V-Spec edition. So that's something that's cool if you have a V-Spec vehicle. There is a slight variations between the MDF. The earlier models, such as this one, that's a 1999 model, has a slightly different look and feel, has a bit more bigger pixels, lower resolution, have different unit measurements than the later model after 2001. One thing I would like to show you, there's also an accelerate genometer that tells you the G-force. There's also a boost over time graph and with one single turbo boost gauge. And there's also a boost gauge with, I believe, the oil temperature. So that kind of concludes all it has as an MDF. This is something that was truly like you're playing a Nintendo while you're driving the car. Obviously one of the most cool features about the R34. The first thing you step into the R35 GTR is obviously the same MDF. If we quickly look at the multifunctional display of the R35, there's a lot more tricks and little things that you can do. This is the view that you can have your turbo gauge, the boost gauge with accelerator pedal sensors. The second page has all sorts of temperature information. Not only does it have the exhaust temperature and such, there's also engine oil temp, engine oil pressure, transmission oil pressure, which is new, and also coolant pressure, etc., etc. There's also the fuel range, the fuel flow, and the economy over time. So that's something that's new also. It does also tell you how the torque split is at any point of time between the rear wheel drive and all-wheel drive system, how much G-force it's producing vertically, you know, the boost gauge, the speed. The steering is very handy, so you can see from left and right how much steering input you're giving. And this one is also a G-meter over time, the boost and acceleration. One thing that I do want to mention about the R35 is a lot of these pages are absolutely customizable, so you can do a lot more things with it. It's pretty fun to play with. Now, I personally think this is an okay MDF, definitely ahead of its game for its time. Personally, I think the R34 is just as spacious as the R35 in the interior. However, the R34 does have a lot more room in the back because of the fact that there is really no dual clutch transmission in the back. One thing I really want to mention about the R34 GTR is its build quality. So after 20 years of wear and tear, the interior of the R34 is still immaculate. And this is probably a very bad example of showing you this because this car is mostly upgraded. However, in a stock vehicle, what I can tell you easily is that it does not have any rattle. And that is something I really have to praise Nissan for really thinking about longevity, and the build quality really speaks to itself. Let's talk about the rear seat space of the R35 GTR. The R35 GTR is called a 2+2 vehicle, meaning 2 seats in the front and 2 seats in the back. I pretty much flipped the front seat forward and you can see how much legroom you potentially get. It's absolutely nothing, and you can obviously see the transmission tunnel. They've put a kind of a holder, a plastic piece here. Now it's being wrapped in Alcantara with a little cup holder, and they also do have the subwoofer in the back. that kind of goes with this entire piece. Now that being said, if you really want to stretch 4 people into this vehicle, it's absolutely possible. However, it's just very painful. So I would say that's a plus on the R34 if you're really keen on the rear passengers room space. In terms of trunk space, R35 has a decent amount of space. However, what is really annoying about this particular setup is that the trunk space does not open from here. So you almost have to drop everything through the top, and when you have a luggage bag that's bigger than the width over here, or something that's a little bit more of a cubic-like luggage, it is really hard to fit into the trunk space, even though that you might have enough room to fit it. The other thing that I really do not like about the R35 setup is that it does not allow you to pull this particular thing forward. So you can't really put any ski boards or something that's longer through its rear seat. And that's really a huge problem in terms of practicality. And unfortunately, I cannot open this trunk at all since this is a race car. Rear wing is bolted onto its chassis. In order to open this particular trunk space, I have to really unbolt all of the nuts and bolts, take the spoiler off first, and then can open up the trunk. But one thing I can talk about the R34 trunk space is that because the battery is located in the back, your trunk is actually a lot narrower than a regular car. So it makes fitting luggages very difficult. I mean, R34 overall is a big car, but in proportion to its trunk space, I think practicality is on the lower end of this particular vehicle in terms of its priority. Now I want to mention a little bit about R34's handling characteristics. I would say the R34 is a much smaller feel on its chassis when you drive it than the R35. You can obviously tell the car is narrower, and when you drive the car, you can feel like in terms of weight, it is lighter than the R35 GTR. The steering wheel feel is one of the most pleasant thing in its class in its time. It really goes where you want the car go. The steering input is that direct. The R34 is a bit more raw, though the high cuts does help when you're driving from a day-to-day standpoint. It does come in as kind of an issue when you're driving at its limit, because when the car starting to slide out, you really do not know how the rear wheel is going to react. It almost feels like it's wiggling a little bit, and then you try your best to guess what the wheel is going to do. But for its time, this is something definitely revolutionary. So one thing about the R35 GTR is you obviously sit a lot taller than the R34, and you can tell the car is much wider, much bigger. If you in terms of footprint, you can see that the car has a bit more in the front and in its back. One thing that you can very much tell the first time you drive and take in a corner is that the R35 feels a lot heavier. The handle of the R35 is very interesting. The steering wheel is just as impressive. I won't put it in the same category as, you know, a 991.2 or 997 Porsche, but it's pretty darn good. One thing that people always complain about is the fact that the car is driving itself for you instead of you really driving the car. I think it kind of feels like that when you have a stock car, but once you really put a lot more power onto the chassis, you start appreciating all these technologies, because it is very dangerous to drive a car that's 800 horsepower and 900 horsepower without these electric nannies helping you. It's more of a GT car than actually a small track racer. Having that all-wheel drive system and dual clutch really makes it up, even though the car is bulkier and heavier. It is just a progression of the automotive era, where cars are getting more capable, they're bigger, they're even faster, they're safer, and it's more computerized. So it's really about what you like.
So thank you for still sticking with me. So we've quickly talked about the powertrain, the reliability, the interior, the practicality of the vehicle, and also some of the handling characteristics of the vehicle. So hopefully those are some insight that really helps you understand how the R34 GTR and the R35 GTR are different. In terms of value of these vehicles today, an R34 GTR that is a non-V-spec are selling something around $70,000 in Japan today. A V-spec that with low mileage can sell something north of $100,000 today.
And an example of this type of vehicles, which is truly a one-off with a really, really unique color and lots of modifications that are done correctly, can fetch something closer to 200K. Now let's talk about the R35 GTR in terms of price. A CBA of this sort, that's a pre-2011 model, you can probably buy one of these vehicles around $55,000. And for a DBA vehicle, you're looking at just north of $60,000. So it's very much a lot more affordable than an R34 GTR. And one thing that you really have to watch out if you were wanting to buy an R35 is whether or not the transmission has been fixed for early models, because you're really prone to braking. So overall, after talking about the price and understanding the price value, there's really no comparisons between these two vehicles. They serve different needs. This R34 is almost not obtainable in the US today. It's a halo car with a price of $100,000. Most likely the people who are getting these vehicles are collectors or people who are truly going to put tasteful mods onto them. Now, R35 to me is more of a practical vehicle that you can drive on a daily basis. I've owned this vehicle for 8 years now. I do always drive this car as an off daily. I have no problem driving that all the time. It's a very reliable vehicle that can almost does anything on the street. And in terms of a grocery getter, it is obviously nice. However, it does lack a little bit of a practicality because of how powerful it is. I'll never drive a vehicle like this on a daily basis, but it's absolutely a blast driving one of these guys to a show and have kids jumping around with it, interacting with it. And I think the R34 serves that well today. Hopefully you like this episode. If you have any additional questions between these vehicles, I welcome to have you comment below, and I'll look at each of the comments and answer a lot of your questions. Hopefully this is something that can really help you understand these two vehicles in depth from an owner's perspective and really explain to you on the differences between them. And again, if you like this type of content, make sure to subscribe and have a notification bell, because I'll come up with a lot more head-to-head in the near future for you. Again, this is Mark Wang, and you're watching Mark Wang Car Garage, and I'll see you next time.